You've been taught that silence is power, that the less you speak, the more mature you are. That wise people always know when to keep their mouths shut. And in many situations, that's true. But there's a side of silence that no one talks about, a side that doesn't look dangerous, a side that feels safe, a side that slowly, quietly, reshapes your life without asking for your permission. Because sometimes, silence is not strength, it's erosion. It doesn't break you all at once. It doesn't collapse your life in a single moment. It works differently. It takes something from you, piece by piece, your voice, your presence, your identity, until one day you look around and realize you've become invisible in your own life. And the most dangerous part is, you didn't even notice when it started. You think you're protecting peace, but you're trading it for respect. You think you're controlling your emotions, but you're slowly giving away your power. You think you're choosing the mature path, but sometimes you're just avoiding discomfort. And there's a pattern hidden inside all of this, a pattern that shows up again and again, in relationships, in work, in family, in society, a pattern where silence doesn't protect you, it rewrites the rules of how the world treats you, and if you're not aware of it, you don't just stay silent, you become shaped by it. Let's start with something simple. Have you ever known something was wrong, but said nothing? Have you ever felt disrespected, but told yourself, it's not worth it? Have you ever had something important to say, but held it back, because it felt easier? If you have, then understand this, you were not just staying silent, you were teaching the world how to treat you, because people don't just react to what you say, they react to what you allow, and silence is one of the strongest signals you send. The first situation where silence becomes dangerous is when you face injustice. There is a kind of silence that feeds what is wrong, not loudly, not obviously, but consistently. Every time you witness something unfair, a lie, a manipulation, an abuse of power, and you choose not to speak, you don't just stay neutral, you reinforce it, because injustice doesn't need strength to survive. It only needs lack of resistance. It only needs no one to challenge it. Imagine a small fire. At first it's harmless, contained, almost insignificant, but no one puts it out. No one reacts, no one steps in, and slowly it grows. It spreads, it consumes. Silence, in that moment, is not calmness, it is fuel, and without realizing it, you become part of what you never wanted to support. But the deeper danger is internal, because every time you stay silent in front of what is wrong, you train your mind, you condition yourself, you become a version of yourself that tolerates more than it should, and over time, your threshold shifts. What once felt unacceptable becomes normal, and that is how people lose themselves, not in one decision, but in 1,000 silent ones. The second situation is when your boundaries are crossed, and this one is more personal, more subtle, more dangerous. Because it doesn't always feel like something big. Sometimes it's just a small moment. Someone interrupts you, and you say nothing. Someone disrespects your time, and you accept it. Someone crosses a line, and you convince yourself it's not a big deal. But here's the truth. Every time you don't respond, you are writing an invisible contract. You can do this to me, and the world reads that contract, not consciously, but clearly. Your boundaries are not what you think they are. They are what you enforce. They are what you protect. They are what you are willing to speak up for. Without that, there are no boundaries, only assumptions. And assumptions get broken. You don't need to be aggressive. You don't need to be loud. You don't need to fight. You just need clarity. One sentence, simple, direct, no. And in that moment, you're not creating conflict. You're creating structure. You're not pushing people away. You're defining where they can stand, because people don't respect boundaries that are never expressed. The third situation is when the truth needs to be spoken. This is where silence becomes distortion, because lies don't need power. They don't need strength. They don't need intelligence. They only need no opposition, and silence gives them exactly that. Truth, on the other hand, is fragile. Not because it's weak, but because it needs someone to carry it, someone to say it, someone to stand behind it, and sometimes that someone is you. There will be moments in your life where speaking the truth feels risky, where silence feels safe, where saying nothing feels like the smartest option. But every time you choose silence in those moments, you bend reality, not all at once, but gradually, like a mirror that slowly warps, until one day, you don't recognize what you see anymore. And the scariest part? You adapted to it, you got used to it, you accepted a version of reality that was never true. That's why the Stoics didn't use truth as a weapon. They used it as a compass, not to dominate others, but to stay aligned with themselves, because once you lose that alignment, you don't just lose direction, you lose identity. The fourth situation is when someone needs your voice. This is where silence becomes absence. You think, I'm not qualified. I don't know enough. What if I'm wrong? It's not my place. And so, you stay quiet. But what you don't see is the impact you could have made. Because sometimes, people don't need perfection. They need perspective. They need honesty. They need someone who is just one step ahead to say something real. Your experience, your thoughts, your story, they may not feel important to you, but to someone else, they can be clarity, they can be direction, they can be the one thing that shifts everything. Knowledge is like light. If you hide it, nothing changes. If you share it, you don't lose it. You multiply it, and sometimes you will never know who you helped. But that doesn't mean it didn't matter. It just means the ripple continued without you seeing it. The fifth situation is when silence is used against you. This is where silence becomes manipulation, because not all silence is peaceful. Some silence is calculated, strategic, intentional. It's used to control, to create doubt, to shift power. The silent treatment, emotional withdrawal, cold distance. This is not calmness. This is pressure. And if you respond with silence, you enter the game, you accept the rules, you participate without realizing it. But awareness changes everything, because once you recognize it, you don't react emotionally, you respond clearly, you name what's happening, you break the illusion, not with anger, but with precision. One sentence, one question, one moment of clarity is enough to shift the dynamic, because power doesn't belong to the loudest voice. It belongs to the clearest one. The sixth situation is when your reputation is at stake. This is where silence becomes vulnerability, because your reputation is not only built by what you do, it's also shaped by what you allow to exist around you. You think, people will understand, the truth will reveal itself, I don't need to explain. But the world doesn't operate on assumptions, it operates on narratives. And if a false narrative is not challenged, it becomes accepted, not because it's true, but because it's uncontested. You don't need to defend yourself endlessly. You don't need to argue. You don't need to justify every detail. You just need clarity, short, calm, direct. Because one clear statement can protect years of effort, years of credibility, years of trust. And if you don't tell your story, someone else will, and they won't tell it in a way that protects you. And now, we arrive at the seventh situation, the most overlooked, the most subtle, the most dangerous, the moment when you have the ability to create change. This is where silence becomes regret, because you think influence is something external, something distant, something reserved for people with status, with platforms, with authority. But real influence doesn't start there. It starts with one moment, one decision, one voice, at the right time. You don't need to change everything, you just need to change something for someone, because impact doesn't spread through noise, it spreads through connection. One person hears you, that person changes, that person affects someone else, and suddenly, what started as one voice becomes a ripple, and ripples don't ask for permission. They move, they expand, they reach places you never intended. Silence, in those moments, is not neutrality, it's a lost opportunity, a door that doesn't stay open forever, a moment that doesn't repeat. And here's the truth most people avoid. You are not afraid to speak, you are afraid of what happens after: rejection, judgment, misunderstanding, discomfort. But ask yourself this: what is the cost of staying silent? Not today, but in the long run, 5 years, 10 years, a lifetime, where you constantly hold back, where you shrink when you should stand, where you stay quiet when something inside you says, this matters. That's not peace, that's limitation, that's a smaller version of who you could be. And deep down, you know it. The Stoics understood something powerful. Silence is not inherently good, speech is not inherently bad. Both are tools, and power comes from knowing when to use which. They didn't stay silent out of fear, they stayed silent with intention, and they spoke with purpose, not to impress, not to dominate, but to align, to protect, to define. And that's the difference. So now, pause. Just for a moment, ask yourself honestly, is your silence protecting you, or is it slowly destroying you? Because sometimes, what feels like control is actually suppression. What feels like peace is actually avoidance. What feels like maturity is actually fear. Wearing a mask, you don't need to speak more, you don't need to be louder, you don't need to force your voice, you just need to be intentional, to recognize the moment, to understand the weight of silence, to choose consciously, because your voice is not noise. It is direction, it is boundary, it is identity. And the final question is not, should I speak? It is, if I don't speak, who will I become? Because sometimes, one sentence is all it takes to protect your dignity, to change a direction, to break a pattern, to save a life, including your own.